The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 16. The Department of Dreamtime Access. Alusha left the observatory and made her way back across the square. After entering her residence, she pressed the button for her penthouse and waited for the elevator doors to open straight onto the large marble foyer. She kicked off her shoes, tossing her purse on the glass console table, and then made her way towards her bedroom. It was now time to change into her bathing suit. Alusha smoothed out the fabric that clung to her toned physique and then pulled her hair back into a high ponytail. A recent addition to Alusha's private paradise had been a mirrored 25-foot resistance pool. When she tired of it, she would replace it with some other novelty, but for now she swam for an hour every day, which left her feeling ready to take on the world. After drying off, Alusha stepped onto her yoga mat and spent the next 30 minutes bending her body into varied positions of physical deftness. She was waiting for Yanni. He wanted to relax at home, and later they would join Melchizedek for dinner. Alusha and Yanni had known each other for a long time, but it wasn't until recently that their chemistry had become charged in a new and exciting way. Yanni was an advanced soul, skilled in the art of diplomacy, able to gain the trust of even the most guarded of species. His assignments took him to new civilizations whose inhabitants were in the early stages of evolution. For the newer planets only, intercession was permitted during the rapid growth stages, but only until a reasonable degree of stability had been established. Then evolution would continue at its own pace. Only a few souls like Yanni existed, not godsons, but not far off, just not willing to commit to the protracted course of becoming the created. Yanni was a freelance consultant, under contract to the many godsons who had committed. Alusha had more or less grown accustomed to the fact that she had fallen in love with a gypsy, but sometimes her boyfriend's lifestyle was difficult to embrace. Alusha was seldom able to join Yanni on his travels, only occasionally for a couple of days here and there. She was bound starside for as long as heaven on earth was still a work in progress. Yanni had just returned from an assignment on Sepphoris, an isolated planet recently thought into being by one of the youngest godsons. The Sepporians had evolved as the human model had, and their current form was that of a cow-like animal. They had learned to walk upright, and their front legs were now more like arms. The Sepporians looked a little like hunched humans, but they were smaller and their features bovine. Their lifespan was also longer than the average human, many of the strongest having been alive for over 500 years. A fertile female was only able to birth one baby in one lifetime, and the incubation of her fetus took 4 years. But due to the size of the newborn, the mortality rate was high. The spoken language across the planet was universal but still primitive, and so was their technology. Yanni's mission was firstly to integrate and then guide a select group of Sepporian citizens on how to recognise and map the influences of other orbiting planets. The Sepporians had been worshipping a large moon as their god for longer than anticipated, and by decreasing levels of superstition, Yanni hoped to usher in a new age of reason. Yanni was able to alter his molecular structure to take on the appearance of any life form, and when he had first surfaced on Sepphoris, the Sepporian chief had initially been suspicious, but quickly embraced him as an orphan looking for a colony to join. Yanni's frequent disappearance from the prime settlement was justified by his self-confessed need for solitude. He had convinced the chief that a regular retreat to the outer desert regions was vital for him to maintain a healthy focus. He was considered eccentric, but no one ever questioned him coming and going. Yanni was known to be a wise creature and was revered and respected. Hundreds of years after his arrival, a mythology would arise around this event, much of it fable and a sprinkling of historical fact, preserved and transmitted orally to the Sepporian young as the incontestable truth that a young Messiah had once indeed walked amongst them. Yanni had seen this many times before. Until the price of unreason became too high, the preservation of ancient ignorance remained a laborious part of the evolutionary journey for many life forms. Yanni was happy to be back at the parish with his newfound love Alusha. He did not know where his next assignment would take him, or for how long, but for now he intended to make the most of his time off. Yanni and Alusha were scheduled to leave for Meepo in the morning. Alusha couldn't wait for Yanni to meet Heap, and he was excited for Alusha to meet his beloved creation too. A very long time ago, before Alusha had come into existence on Meepo, Yanni had inadvertently created a very interesting breed of horse, a white-winged stallion, the fastest animal in the local universe, on the ground and in the air, which he had named Pegasus. Yanni was an excellent horseman and vowed that Alusha would soon be too. A double-seated saddle was waiting in the tack room. Yanni had no idea that his girlfriend was a better horseman than he. Yanni entered the apartment he and Alusha now shared and made his way into their bedroom. Alusha was lying on a yoga mat beside the pool, stretching her body. She was hot and sweaty and looked very alluring in her gold lame bathing suit. "Hey sexy, coming in for a dip?" beckoned Alusha. Yanni immediately removed his clothes, and with a large arm circle and keeping his legs straight and his toes tightly pointed, he launched himself into a perfect arc, parting the water with his hand without making a single splash. Alusha smiled and dove in after him. Her boyfriend was the perfect blend of power and brawn, but he was sweet and innocent and mysterious. There was so much she wanted to know about him. After an intense 15-minute workout, Yanni was the first to get out of the pool. Alusha was still as strong as she had been a minute into her swim. As he wrapped a towel around his waist, Yanni peered closely at his girlfriend, who had now sprouted tail flukes to separate the water and propel herself like a dolphin. "Come here, Flipper, here's a towel," said Yanni, laughing. His disdain for planet Earth would likely not change until the conditions there did, but he found the movies humans created to distract themselves very entertaining. "Your guilty pleasure," Alusha had once called the movies. "We all have them," he replied. Yanni waited at the pool's edge, and when Alusha emerged, he was relieved to see that she was once again all woman. With a towel wrapped around her waist and a turban around her head, Alusha walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of orange juice. She and Yanni then flopped down on opposite ends of a long cream couch. "What are your plans for the rest of the day, baby girl?" he inquired, resting his head on the arm and yawning. "I have a couple of daytime naps to enter. I might enter yours if you fall asleep on me." "Don't worry, I'll see you coming," said Yanni, closing his eyes. He had not slept in 11 days. As Yanni relaxed, Alusha began making a mental note of her afternoon plans. Entering the daytime nap of those souls fortunate enough to be able to cut loose from the everyday slog of life was not a major part of her schedule, but an important one. While Yanni napped, Alusha began considering the challenges facing her. She had long since been adept at using the dream time to uncover the problems most people had buried deep within their subconscious, but the soul she was planning to visit that afternoon was starting to fear sleep. Jim was exhausted, but now he was sitting in his recliner watching cricket and would likely nod off. If Jim understood that the purpose of his recent nightmares was to allow him to see a reflection of the darkness within himself in the safe and karma-free confines of the dream time, he would be in a better position to accept his shadow self as part of his whole. But Jim felt that life was just random, and his wife told him that darkness was the work of devils and demons, so he had become stuck. Alusha would have to tweak her methods. After a particularly startling dream sequence several nights ago, Jim had inadvertently called out a prayer for help, and he was embarrassed that his wife, sleeping next to him, might have heard. Alusha was dedicated to delivering Jim from his fears. Due to the unbending law of free will, Alusha, along with those she referred to as her dream team, were only permitted to enter the dreams of those souls who had requested knowledge, guidance or encouragement in prayer. This was just one of the means by which the higher order above reached out to those floundering below. As Alusha lay still, listening to her boyfriend's even breathing, she reflected the early years of her ministry had been mostly unproductive. The problem the ancient desert dwellers of the Semitic races faced was that they had been inundated with the idea that man was small and powerless, and thus inclined to pray for the wrong things: healthy goats, a better harvest, a curse to be lifted, more sons. Supernatural intervention in the domestic affairs of those who must learn the proper application of prayer, along with the principles of correct thinking, had never been permitted, but there were a few souls who had mastered the art of getting the heavens to respond. Alusha recalled the time a few millennia ago when she had responded to a farmer in Samaria faced with the ongoing problem of inferior transportation. Intuitively, he had known there was a more efficient way to haul his heavy loads, but he remained baffled. When his thoughts bore no fruit, he had unconsciously asked for supernatural assistance by sending forth into the universe a few tight-lipped mutterings. Unbeknownst to him, his mutterings were potent with transformative energy. Dismissing his irreverent tone with a great delight, Alusha had been happy to stimulate his creative juices in an early morning dream. The young man had found himself running away from a large boulder that seemed to be pursuing him no matter which way he turned. He woke up in a sweat, but greatly inspired. A clumsy but effective blueprint of a wheel had appeared in his mind. A few hundred years later, Alusha recalled the words of another young and exasperated soul whose string of frustrated words had reached her without any ambiguity. The man's hungry offspring were multiplying, his wife was pregnant again, and he was getting desperate. "Help me, O Lord, I beseech you. My mind is idle and my hands under work. I rebuke my demons as I lust for my own worth as a child of the Most High God, to deliver me from my apathy." Caleb had no idea that he too would soon become a successful recipient of Alusha's nighttime impartation. He awoke the following morning to a fading dream, but its essence had seemingly inspired a highly creative impulse. Clutching a stick, Caleb headed to a patch of sand behind his dwelling, and by noon a rudimentary blueprint of what would become the world's first aqueduct had been formulated. After a chance meeting with a shrewd and principled businessman with attachments to the court of Herod the following Sunday, Caleb presented his idea with the enthusiasm of a child. The businessman instantly saw the far-reaching promise in Caleb's idea and instigated events to unfold in a way that only those with influence were able. The following year, Caleb became a highly sought-after architect, and both he and his benefactor became very, very rich. In more recent history, Alusha had frequented the dreams of a man named Albert Einstein, and due to the complexity of the knowledge he would impart to the world, this particular conveyance was considered by some to be her greatest achievement. Einstein did not arrive at his theories through a methodical and laborious process. His most brilliant discoveries came to him in flashes of perfected insight that flooded his conscious mind after a succession of vivid dreams. Einstein had unwittingly removed the blocks that would have impeded dreamtime access by sending a prayer into the great unknown. "The nature of the force eludes me, but if the call of destiny I feel so strongly is not a figment of my imagination, then I humbly and expectantly remain open to aid." Einstein did not take seriously the concept of a white-bearded old codger ruling the heavens on high, preferring instead the pantheistic principle of spirit. Due to man's obvious incapacity to fathom what was beyond his intellectual capacity, Einstein believed the great mystery of life would remain just that, in the form of an imperfect, fragmented understanding. But still, something more was out there, he was sure of it. After being taken ill, Einstein refused the surgery that might have saved his life and found himself back Starside 76 years after leaving it. Alusha had met him personally, leading him from the mist to the Department of Returns to be reacquainted with his guide who was expecting him. Einstein was strangely familiar with his beautiful escort, whose hands were so soft and whose gaze was so beguiling, but he could not put a finger on the nature of the familiarity. It was then that Alusha revealed herself as his dreamtime consort, answering the cascade of questions he put forth. After the reinstatement of his greater awareness, Einstein realised the great mystery of life was not that mysterious at all. What he now understood made perfect sense. It was not only logical but easily explainable. The great theological question, who is God, could be answered in a single sentence. Over countless and varied lifetimes, man, as an emanation of the only energy that exists, will evolve into more than he was in varying physical and cerebral forms, from single cell to sublime creator. Alusha brought her attention back to the present, and leaving Yanni to sleep on the couch, she went back into her bedroom to change her clothes, making a mental note to check on Einstein's current progress. The last time she had seen him, he was in a position to resume his afterlife activities, but he had wanted to get back to Earth. Einstein had always been ready and willing to face a hearty challenge. Because he had a minimal amount of karma to balance, he was free to choose the parameters of his next life. His choice confounded many, but Alusha thought it was perfect. Einstein wanted to experience life without his intellect dominating his capacity for direct mystical connection, and so he included physical and mental handicaps in his life plan. He was born blind with cerebral palsy to wealthy level 5 parents whose own life plan centred on the mastery of bigotry. Both Einstein's parents needed to master compassion as a precursor to this attainment, and were very pleased that their future son had chosen to accommodate their learning alongside his own, although at the time of their son's birth this emotion had not been evident. Both parents were horrified. Alusha picked up her purse from the console and quietly left the apartment. Yanni was himself in the dream time, and as Alusha summoned the elevator, she considered making an appearance. The thought made her smile. Flanking the steps of the Dreamtime building were 2 very large, muscular stone donkeys. One was the donkey that communications had spoken through to lead Balaam to repentance, but also as a karmic response for disturbing the fragile mind of his wife by his trickery and relentless mocking. The other was the donkey that carried young Mary to Nazareth. Alusha liked to make use of donkeys in the dream time in an attempt to alert the dreamer that they might be using their bodies like a beast of burden, and should instead honour their temple so the still small voice within could express itself without the undue impediment of physical depletion distracting the soul from hearing. After climbing the steps, Alusha stepped into a quarter section of the revolving door, and so did a man who was exiting. Alusha quickly jammed the door with her foot, and a member of her dream team named Samson found himself trapped in the opposite segment, pushing the glass to no avail. He pressed his face against the glass and raised his fist at Alusha in mock horror. "I get you every time, Samson, and you're supposed to have such strong muscles," said Alusha, shouting through the glass and then blowing a raspberry. Samson laughed. Alusha removed her foot and the door began to revolve again. Samson vowed to be more vigilant. "You're a bad woman, Alusha. You'll never get to heaven," called Samson as he bounded down the steps. His workday was nearly over, and the rest of the afternoon held the promise of indulgence and light-hearted mischief. A vast mural covering the ceiling of the Dreamtime lobby was the work of an artist who, while in the physical, had been celebrated for his lifelike creations. The fluffy white clouds above Alusha's head, the blue skies, the birds and the hot air balloon looked so authentic that those viewing it for the first time were initially uncertain whether they were actually indoors. The realism of the piece had a lot to do with the artist's ability to create the effects of light. Hovering in the foreground were motion shots of several of the artist's relatives who, like every other soul existing within the anchors of space and time, had taken flight during their sleep. Since time immemorial, the human race had always enjoyed their flying dreams, which of course were not dreams at all. Another member of Alusha's dream team stepped out of the elevator. She greeted him with a hug. "Hey Kenny, my big hunk of love, where are you off to in such a rush?" "Hot date." "Ah, anyone I know?" "No, she's not from around here." "Ooh, a foreigner, how exotic." "She is very exotic actually, and beautiful, nothing like you." Alusha slapped Kenny playfully across the cheek. "How dare you?" Kenny laughed and stepped aside, allowing Alusha to enter the elevator. He then made his way towards the revolving doors, but stopped midway and turned around. "Alusha, before you disappear into the dream of some unsuspecting mortal, can you do me a favour? I need a few stems, a bouquet perhaps, roses with no thorns. I forgot to order them this morning and now I'm pressed for time." Sometimes Melchizedek's rules regarding motion and manifestation starside required patience to tolerate. "Come here, Casanova, hold your arms out and don't tell anyone." Alusha centred her awareness and a large box of chocolates appeared in Kenny's arms. The lid had a picture of a strange-looking animal with 2 heads on it. On top of the box lay an enormous bouquet of long-stemmed yellow roses, and nestled between a couple of the blooms was a small gift-wrap box. "Perfect, thanks, love. What's in the box?" "A little trinket. Only give it to her if you really like her, and if you do give it to her, she's going to really love you." Kenny laughed and pulled the cachet of goodies closer to his chest, using his chin to stabilise the mound. In mumbled tones he told Alusha that she was the nicest person he had ever met, and then turned and made his way out of the building and into the square. He only had 40 minutes to get home, shower, change, and check and recheck his appearance. As Kenny's pace quickened, he began rehearsing some foreign terms of endearment in his head. The elevator door closed, and a few seconds later Alusha stepped out into the 93rd floor. The hallway in front of her was lit by a series of half-moon wall sconces that brightened as she made her way to the last door on the right. The 10 by 10 space was covered from floor to ceiling in crisp white granite, and a small prayer mat was set before a candle that emitted a soft violet flame. The flame had been burning without lapse since man had first started to dream. Alusha knelt and closed her eyes before focusing her attention on the flame, which soon matured into the shape of a 4-inch gyrating teardrop. Within the flame was a clear image of a man in the physical. Jim Elks was sitting in his armchair in the living room of an old 3-bedroom limestone structure that sat on the top road in the small village of Woolston, Somerset. The house overlooked a valley of pasture land, and the only other house in view belonged to the Countess de Salis. Her horses were grazing, and smoke bellowed from her various chimneys, which they did night and day from October to March. The only other signs of life were the crows sitting on the fence next to Jim's old Audi in the parking bay. Setting up a dream that enabled Jim to accept his own shadow side would be something Alusha would resume in a month or two. For now she intended to make his dreams more pleasurable, so his fears could decrease. Jim had eaten a large lunch and was sleeping off the effects of the calorie-laden food. As the violet flame began to link Alusha's consciousness with his, she became aware that Jim was too comatose to reach. He had already passed through REM to a realm of reality only experienced by those who had gone to great lengths to subdue their consciousness. Jim was addicted to tranquilizers and had been for the past 27 years. She would try again tonight. Alusha withdrew from Jim Elks's siesta, smiled and refocused her attention on the complex energy patterns of the next soul she wanted to visit. It always took a while for her to get a direct fix on him. As she focused on the gyrating violet flame, an image of Yanni lying on the couch back in their penthouse soon came into view, and as his physique sharpened, his words, "Don't worry, I'll see you coming," played out in her mind. Alusha bit her lip, and then, as a porpoise, she entered her boyfriend's dream with a splash. Yanni had been lying peacefully in the bottom of a small wooden boat bobbing on the bright blue Mediterranean Sea when a sucking sound abruptly disturbed his peaceful solitude. Before he was able to sit up, a huge prehistoric-looking whale launched itself onto the boat, capsizing it. Then, as Yanni began to swim in the direction of the shore, the whale swallowed him whole, lodging him in an airless and clammy black space full of krill and enzymes that stung. He'd not had nightmares for a very long time, but when the smell of gardenia and hyacinths hit his nostrils, along with the sound of his girlfriend's laughing from somewhere further in the cavernous space, his nightmare ended as quickly as it had begun. "Fuck me sideways, Lou, are you serious?" said Yanni, sitting up and opening his eyes wide. He was bemused, but a little shocked. "I thought you said you'd see me coming," said Alusha, laughing. She was back in their penthouse, standing at her boyfriend's side and looking down into his handsome face. "That whale was the one I used back in the day to get Jonah's attention. Isn't he the cutest?" "I wouldn't exactly call that beast cute, but I appreciate that you masked the smell." Yanni grabbed Alusha's hand and pulled her on top of him, and as he breathed in the smell of his girlfriend's perfume, gardenia and hyacinths, he realised in that moment that he loved her more than he had loved anything in his entire existence.